In the quiet hours of a late winter night, the universe whispered something extraordinary. Across deserts, mountaintops, and observatories bathed in the cold glow of instrument panels, a faint rhythm pulsed through the silence of space. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a subtle anomaly buried within the cosmic background, a cadence too precise, too deliberate, to be dismissed as mere noise. Yet there it was, a series of structured signals emanating from the depths of interstellar space, tracing a path toward Earth, from a visitor that had journeyed across the galaxy for millennia. Astronomers stared in disbelief, eyes fixed on screens that revealed more than just numbers. They revealed the possibility of contact, of communication from beyond the known. The instrument's sensitive radio arrays, optical telescopes, and spectrographs registered the irregularities in near real, translating the universe's hidden language into patterns that humans could begin to comprehend. The pulses were not random. They carried a rhythm, a sense of design that spoke not of a wandering rock, but of something conscious, something listening, observing, and perhaps trying to speak. In laboratories across continents, teams worked feverishly, their minds straining against the limits of current science. Data streamed across networks at incredible speed, each signal dissected, compared, and modeled. Initial attempts at decoding revealed sequences that seemed mathematical, structured, evocative of prime numbers, binary patterns, and repeated motifs. For the first time in human history, the cosmos offered more than spectacle. It offered dialogue, tentative and tantalizing. From an object beyond the bounds of our solar system, emotions ran high, exhilaration tempered by caution, awe shadowed by skepticism. In the hushed rooms of observatories, whispers and debates mingled with the hum of machinery. What did these pulses mean? Were they the signature of intelligence, a message encoded across light years, or simply a cosmic coincidence waiting for the right mind to interpret it? Each moment of analysis was a step into the unknown, a confrontation with the extraordinary that challenged the very frameworks through which humanity understood the universe. And yet, beneath the technicalities and calculations, a deeper reflection stirred. For the first time, the cosmos had reached out, and humanity had heard it. This was more than discovery. It was a moment that would forever redefine perspective, a reminder that the universe is not silent, that the void can speak in ways both subtle and profound. The rhythm of those distant pulses resonated not just in instruments, but in the human imagination, awakening a sense of vulnerability, wonder, and profound curiosity. The anomaly demanded scrutiny, careful and relentless. Each pulse, each modulation beckoned the mind forward, revealing hints yet refusing full disclosure. The first message had arrived, a spark of cosmic communication, carrying the weight of a question humanity had never fully imagined: what or who might be reaching across the galaxy, trying to speak. And as the night deepened, the signals persisted, calling for interpretation, for understanding, for humanity to listen more closely than ever before. As the first pulses from 3I Atlas reverberated through the arrays of Earth's telescopes, patterns began to emerge, subtle yet unmistakable. Each sequence, each fluctuation in intensity carried a signature that defied the randomness of cosmic noise. Astronomers and signal analysts pored over the data with painstaking care, translating frequencies into visual charts, mapping the cadence of the transmissions into arcs and lines that glimmered on monitors like starlight frozen in motion. There was a rhythm to it, deliberate and precise, as if the object itself were orchestrating a symphony across the vast void. The initial excitement of discovery gave way to a disciplined frenzy. Teams of researchers, many of whom had dedicated their lives to probing the quiet corners of the universe, now faced an unprecedented challenge, interpreting what might be the first deliberate communication from an interstellar source. Every spike in the signal was scrutinized. Every pause was measured. Some patterns suggested repetition, others modulation that hinted at numerical logic, the language of mathematics itself. The universe, it seemed, had chosen numbers as its first medium of dialogue with humanity. A language simultaneously universal and alien. Skepticism remained. Could these sequences be the byproduct of natural processes, subtle interactions between solar radiation and cometary material? Or did they bear the imprint of intelligence? Peer-reviewed theories were drafted in real time, hypotheses tested and discarded with rapid precision. Observatories from Europe, Asia, and North America cross-referenced readings, verifying that these anomalies were not local noise, not artifacts of instrumentation, but signals consistent across thousands of kilometers of observation. For the first time, scientists had something concrete, a pattern that refused to be ignored. The emotional weight of the discovery was impossible to overstate. In offices and control rooms, researchers alternated between exhilaration and fear, their minds straining to grasp the implications. What entity, natural or otherwise, could produce such intentional patterns? And, perhaps most unnervingly, what did these signals mean? Was there a message embedded, waiting to be decoded? Or were they a cosmic taunt, an echo from a universe that was both intelligible and infinitely beyond comprehension? Each new pulse teased the boundaries of understanding, revealing glimpses of order while withholding full clarity, compelling humanity to pay attention, to listen with patience, and to imagine with care, visually. The signals were transformed into light and motion, projected across walls and screens like a living map of distant space. Peaks became stars, troughs became valleys, and within these undulating patterns, analysts discerned repetition, symmetry, and intervals that felt intentional. There was a subtle artistry to it, as if the cosmos itself had chosen form to attract notice, to communicate without words, without sound, yet with undeniable presence. The tension between the scientific and the aesthetic was profound. Each discovery blended reason with wonder, evidence with imagination. The signal was no longer just data. It was a conversation, however tentative, with a visitor that had traveled light years to reach Earth's instruments. Humanity, suddenly small yet intensely alert, stood at the threshold of understanding. The observations revealed a duality, the clarity of structured information and the opacity of meaning, both coexisting in a delicate cosmic balance. And as researchers continued to trace each pulse, each modulation, the sense of mystery deepened. The object was no longer a distant anomaly. It had become a participant in an unfolding story, one whose next chapter demanded that the universe itself be observed more closely than ever before. The signals hinted at something extraordinary, but full comprehension remained elusive. Questions multiplied, urgency intensified, and curiosity burned brighter. What principles governed these pulses? Were they intentional patterns, messages, or something entirely beyond known physics? The data invited deeper exploration, compelling the minds of Earth's best to refine their tools, sharpen their models, and prepare for revelations that would soon test the limits of science and imagination alike. And thus, as the night stretched across continents, the mystery of the signal unfolded, leading naturally toward the deeper contradictions in motion and physics that would soon define the next stage of discovery. As the nights turned into weeks, the patterns within 3I Atlas transmissions became increasingly intricate. Each new observation revealed layers of structure previously unseen, subtle variations that suggested a level of organization far beyond the randomness of natural phenomena. Researchers began to notice sequences nested within sequences, a fractal-like complexity that mirrored both mathematical elegance and artistic intent. The signals seemed to operate on multiple scales simultaneously, as though each pulse carried a message both obvious and hidden, comprehensible and enigmatic at once. Teams working in isolation began to cross-correlate findings, comparing data from the radio arrays of Chile with optical observatories in Hawaii, with interferometry arrays stretching across Europe. The convergence of readings left no room for doubt. These were not mere fluctuations of dust and gas, nor echoes of solar wind. The signals bore coherence, precision, and timing that defied accidental origins. For some scientists, the realization was electrifying. For others, it was terrifying, a humbling confrontation with a universe capable of deliberate, intelligent complexity. Attempts at interpretation evolved into a delicate dance of probability, algorithm, and intuition. Statistical models, Fourier transforms, and pattern recognition algorithms were deployed in relentless cycles, each new iteration peeling back layers of mystery only to reveal further puzzles beneath. Some sequences hinted at prime numbers, others suggested rotational symmetries akin to molecular structures. Still others evoked rhythms resembling neural oscillations. The signal's architecture was as alien as it was familiar, simultaneously echoing forms found in nature while asserting a presence that felt unmistakably deliberate. Yet even as the structure became apparent, meaning remained elusive. Was the signal a greeting, a map, a declaration of existence? Or was it simply a demonstration of capabilities, a cosmic fingerprint left by an intelligence testing the attentiveness of its observers? Every hypothesis raised further questions. The very act of observing, of attempting to decode, became part of a larger dialogue, an unspoken exchange spanning light years, connecting minds on Earth to a distant, unseen origin. Emotionally, the toll was profound. Researchers worked in shifts around the clock, their focus sharpened to the point where fatigue and obsession blurred. In quiet moments, away from the hum of servers and the glow of monitors, scientists grappled with the existential weight of their task. They were not merely measuring electromagnetic phenomena, they were interpreting a message from a voyager that had journeyed across the galaxy, a messenger that might possess a form of consciousness utterly unlike their own. Every pulse challenged assumptions about life, intelligence, and the very nature of communication. Visually, the signals were transformed into dynamic simulations, projected across observatory walls in cascading streams of light. Peaks flared like distant stars, troughs faded like cosmic valleys, and patterns intertwined in ways that suggested geometry, rhythm, and purpose. These projections, while abstract, allowed minds trained in physics and mathematics to glimpse the hidden architecture, to feel the intentionality embedded in the signal's design. Even without translation, the sequences conveyed a presence and awareness stretching across the interstellar void, waiting to be recognized. As Earth's instruments continued to listen, the signals fluctuated in intensity, sometimes fading to near silence before surging again, as if observing the attentiveness of their recipients. The pauses were as meaningful as the pulses, spaces pregnant with expectation, compelling scientists to confront patience, humility, and imagination. Humanity was no longer an observer alone. It had become a participant in a nascent dialogue, its understanding incomplete but evolving, suspended between comprehension and wonder. And so, the night deepened, filled with the quiet hum of machinery, the soft murmur of data streams, and the persistent, intricate voice of a visitor from beyond. Each pulse was both revelation and question, each modulation a challenge to the limits of perception. The signals demanded attention, demanded care, demanded imagination, leading inexorably toward the contradictions in motion and behavior that would soon defy all known physical laws. The universe, in the voice of Three-Eye Atlas, was speaking, and humanity had no choice but to listen, to ponder, and to follow. The signal alone was only part of the story. As astronomers tracked Three-Eye Atlas through the black expanse of space, the object's motion defied expectation, sketching an orbit that resisted all known physical laws. Classical mechanics, the centuries-old framework that had guided humanity from Newton to Kepler, faltered before the subtle accelerations and directional shifts of this interstellar wanderer. It moved not as a passive comet might, nudged by the gravity of planets and the pressure of sunlight, but with a precision that suggested purpose. A choreography, invisible yet undeniable. Observatories around the globe measured the deviations with painstaking accuracy. Radio telescopes recorded tiny fluctuations in velocity, while optical instruments captured minute changes in trajectory. Every calculation seemed to confirm the impossible. The object's course was influenced by forces that could not be explained by gravity or conventional physics alone. Even the faint outgassing expected from icy bodies failed to account for the measured For scientists, the data was electrifying and terrifying. The universe, in its silent vastness, had produced a visitor that played by rules humanity had yet to fully understand. Surface observations added further enigma. Reflections of sunlight hinted at areas of differing albedo, patches that gleamed as if polished, others rough and dark. Some regions appeared inert, yet subtle energy interactions suggested responsiveness, a capacity to react to its surroundings in ways not fully consistent with known material science. Every photon captured told a story of contradiction, an object both ordinary and extraordinary, familiar in composition yet alien in behavior. It was a riddle written in ice, rock, and motion, a cipher moving silently through the cosmic deep. Mathematical models strained under the weight of anomaly. Orbital simulations incorporating non-gravitational forces hinted at subtle propulsion effects. Yet no visible emissions could account for them. The equations demanded reconciliation, a merging of classical understanding with a phenomenon that appeared to transcend it. Some researchers speculated on exotic physics outflows of volatile gases guided by unknown mechanisms, or interactions with dark matter or fields yet undetected. Others whispered of more speculative ideas: self-propelling craft, mechanisms invisible to current instrumentation, intelligence encoded in motion rather than signal alone. Humanity's confrontation with the unknown was both scientific and philosophical. The object forced reflection on the limitations of observation, the humility of human knowledge, and the enormity of the cosmos. Each unexpected acceleration, each subtle shift, challenged not only technical understanding but also the narrative humans told themselves about the predictability of the universe. It was a reminder that knowledge, no matter how advanced, was provisional, a fragile illumination against the darkness of mystery. Yet within the contradictions, patterns emerged. Repeated accelerations occurred at intervals that coincided with specific positions relative to the sun, suggesting a subtle, perhaps deliberate interaction with solar radiation. Rotational dynamics hinted at adjustments that maintained stability or orientation, as if the object were aware of its environment, maintaining course with intention rather than inertia alone. The more it was studied, the more Three-Eye Atlas seemed less like a natural object and more like a message inscribed in movement, an intelligence speaking in the language of physics. Emotionally, the stakes were profound. Researchers wrestled with awe, uncertainty, and a realization that they were witnessing a phenomenon without precedent. Instruments were calibrated repeatedly, errors checked and rechecked, yet the data persisted. Each confirmation deepened both fascination and unease. The universe was revealing a secret, one that defied expectation and invited contemplation of forces and intelligences far beyond human experience. The object's defiance of the laws of motion was not a puzzle to be solved quickly, but a dialogue to be engaged with patience, rigor, and imagination. Every adjustment, every unexpected maneuver, demanded observation, calculation, and reflection. It was a cosmic conversation, one in which the object had spoken first with pulses of signal, now with its very path through the stars. And as scientists traced each subtle shift, the realization crystallized. The universe was not silent, and 3I Atlas had chosen a language both mathematical and motioned, one that would challenge humanity to listen in ways never before required. Amid the technical analysis, the psychological and philosophical dimensions became impossible to ignore. Humanity had long considered itself the measure of intelligence in the cosmos, yet here was an interstellar visitor demonstrating mastery of motion, timing, and persistence on scales unimaginable. The silent choreography of 3I Atlas evoked both humility and awe, a reminder that understanding is provisional and that the universe may be filled with forces and entities whose logic transcends human experience. As researchers continued their meticulous measurements, patterns in the anomalies began to suggest faint regularities, guiding hypotheses for the next stage of investigation. The motions themselves hinted at origins, perhaps even intention, inviting a new kind of scientific storytelling, one that integrated physics, observation, and speculative interpretation into a unified search for understanding. Every calculation, every plotted trajectory reinforced a single truth: the object's behavior was not random. It carried meaning in the subtle rhythms of its movement, in the deliberate deviations from expectation, and in the quiet persistence of a journey that had spanned light years. The mystery deepened with every observation. The universe had spoken through motion as it had through signal, and humanity was compelled to respond with attention, ingenuity, and wonder. 3. The first atlas had revealed that understanding could no longer be measured solely in equations or instruments, but in patience, reflection, and a willingness to engage with the unknown. The object's defiance of the laws of motion was not merely a scientific puzzle, it was an invitation, a silent summons to follow its trajectory into questions that stretched beyond physics into the realms of consciousness, intention, and the possible. The anomalies in motion and the enigmatic signals compelled scientists to look beyond mere observation and toward origin. Every deviation, every pulse, became a clue to a journey that had begun long before humanity existed. A voyage that stretched across thousands of light years and countless eons. Using precise orbital reconstructions and celestial mapping, astronomers began to trace the object's path backward through the galaxy, following invisible threads woven into the cosmic web. Each calculation brought new revelations, each simulation a glimpse into the vast corridors of interstellar space that 3I Atlas had traversed. The process was painstaking. Teams analyzed its approach from multiple angles, cross-referencing data from the Pan-STARRS and Atlas surveys with spectral readings and radio observations. By triangulating its trajectory, they could estimate the object's origin to a sparse region of the galactic plane, a sector densely populated with stars that had long since evolved, died, or shifted in position. The path suggested a wanderer that had been set in motion millions, perhaps billions, of years ago, carrying with it information or intention encoded in both movement and signal. Spectroscopic analysis offered further hints. Subtle differences in reflected light revealed compositional fingerprints, traces of elements rarely found in the solar system. Organic compounds mingled with silicate rock, icy deposits, juxtaposed against metals, an unusual combination that hinted at formation in a stellar system unlike any nearby. The chemical story of 3I Atlas was written across its surface, a map not only of origin but of survival, a testament to endurance through the cold void and the creation of countless stars. Yet reconstruction alone could not account for the anomalies. The journey appeared purposeful, as if guided by factors beyond gravity or chance. Some researchers proposed that it had been nudged by planetary systems along its route, a celestial pinball set in motion by interstellar forces. Others suggested more speculative possibilities, a self-propelled probe launched from an or a natural object subtly manipulated over millennia to deliver signals upon arrival at Earth. While the evidence remained circumstantial, the very act of mapping its path forced humanity to confront the possibility of intelligence operating on a timescale and distance far beyond our own comprehension. Visualization became essential to comprehension. Dynamic models projected its galactic trajectory in 3 dimensions, a luminous thread weaving through stars and dust clouds arcing across light years with precision and elegance. Viewers could witness its journey not as a static orbit, but as a narrative unfolding in time and space. Each curve a sentence, each acceleration a gesture. Through these visualizations, the object transformed from a distant anomaly into a character, a cosmic traveler whose story intersected with humanity at the exact moment we had the capacity to observe. The human element of this tracing was equally profound. Scientists pored over star catalogues, recalculating positions, refining models, and testing every conceivable variable. Debates ran deep. Were the deviations intentional or emergent? Did the signal originate en route, or was it crafted to activate near Earth? Every hypothesis required extraordinary precision, a combination of mathematics, physics, and imagination. The act of tracing 3I Atlas became a meditation on patience and scale, an exercise in humility before the immensity of time and space. In the quiet of observatories, as telescopes followed the path of the visitor, a deeper reflection emerged. Humanity had always looked outward, seeking origins in the light of stars. Yet this journey was not merely historical, it was interactive. 3I Atlas had arrived, carrying both evidence of where it had been and a message of arrival, challenging the linearity of time and the simplicity of cause and effect. Its motion was both record and communication, a dual language written in trajectory and encoded in subtle variations across its path. The tracing revealed an interstellar voyage meticulously preserved, a history spanning star systems and epochs, arriving now at a moment of recognition. Each data point, each reconstructed segment of the path, compelled reflection on endurance, intelligence, and intent across the galaxy. The object was not simply a visitor. It was a bridge between distant cosmic processes and the minds of observers on Earth, a testament to motion as a medium for story, knowledge, and perhaps consciousness. And as the maps grew more detailed, the origin more defined, humanity faced the profound realization that following the path of 3I Atlas was more than an exercise in science. It was an invitation to consider intelligence beyond Earth, endurance beyond civilization, and communication beyond words. Each plotted trajectory, each spectral signature, hinted that the universe itself might be capable of reaching across unimaginable distances, orchestrating encounters that would redefine the boundary between observer and observed, between understanding and wonder. As the tracing continued, the scale of 3I Atlas journey became increasingly humbling. Each recalculated position stretched across hundreds of light years, linking stars in nebulae, long extinguished or transformed. The object's path threaded through the spiral arms of the Milky Way like a luminous filament, weaving a story that predated human civilization by millions of years. Every data point represented not just distance but time, a cosmic ledger marking the trajectory of a traveler whose motion was both ancient and precise. Researchers began to explore the statistical likelihood of such a journey intersecting with Earth. Calculations showed that the odds of this interstellar wanderer approaching our solar system in such a detectable manner were extraordinarily slim. Yet there it was, arriving at a time when human instruments were sophisticated enough to perceive it, a convergence that felt almost uncanny. Some scientists quietly admitted that while chance could not be ruled out entirely, the precision and timing hinted at design subtle, indirect, and deeply enigmatic. Spectroscopic data added layers of insight. Variations in surface composition suggested not just formation in a distant star system, but a history of exposure to differing environments, stellar radiation, interstellar dust, and cosmic rays imprinted subtle chemical signatures over eons. These signatures served as both diary and roadmap, chronicling the passage of the object through vast reaches of space. Ice, metal, and organic compounds intermingled in ways that spoke to survival and endurance, a testament to the capacity of matter to persist across immense spans of time and distance. The effort to trace its source became a symphony of interdisciplinary science. Astrophysicists, orbital dynamicists, chemists, and signal analysts collaborated in real time, merging data streams to construct a coherent picture of the object's journey. Every model refined the trajectory, every calculation reduced uncertainty. Yet the deeper the investigation went, the more the object revealed its complexity. It was not merely a passive traveler, but a participant in the unfolding narrative, its course and composition suggesting both history and intention. An archive written across light years, visualization tools turned data into tangible insight. Three-dimensional renderings projected the object's path through space and time, glowing against the dark canvas of the Milky Way. Each node marked a star system, each curve a gravitational encounter, each subtle shift a response to forces or circumstances that may have required adaptation. Observers could almost feel the journey, a pulse of motion stretching across the void, connecting distant points with a continuity that human imagination struggled to comprehend. Amid the technical work, philosophical reflection deepened. Humanity had long looked outward, seeking origins and meaning in the night sky. But 3I Atlas challenged this passive observation. Here was a traveler whose motion conveyed knowledge, whose path carried a record of distant systems, and whose arrival demanded interpretation. The boundary between observation and interaction blurred. By tracing its course, humanity was not merely reconstructing history. It was participating in a story that unfolded on scales of space and time far beyond ordinary comprehension. The path also raised questions of responsibility and response. If 3I Atlas carried intelligence, or even traces of intention, then every observation, every calculation became an act of engagement. Scientists were no longer mere witnesses, they were interpreters, deciphering signals, trajectories, and compositions to grasp meaning embedded in motion itself. Each discovery brought exhilaration, but also a subtle apprehension. What obligations arise when confronted with phenomena that suggest not just existence, but awareness? And so, the tracing reached its crescendo. By mapping the object's route through the galaxy, humanity glimpsed not only its origin, but the magnitude of the voyage and the improbability of its arrival. Every plotted light year, every reconstructed encounter, brought scientists closer to understanding a cosmic journey that spanned millennia, a testament to endurance, mystery, and the vast possibilities inherent in the universe. Yet the ultimate question remained. Was this path purely natural, or had 3i Atlas been guided intentionally or otherwise toward the observers who now sought to understand it? The answer lay just beyond current comprehension, beckoning the next stage of discovery. As the signals persisted and the object's trajectory defied every expectation, the attention of humanity's brightest minds intensified. Across continents, observatories became crucibles of relentless curiosity, their control rooms illuminated by the glow of monitors tracking every pulse, every acceleration. Teams of scientists, mathematicians, and engineers worked tirelessly, their focus sharpened by the enormity of the challenge. Here, the frontier was not a distant planet or a faraway galaxy, was the boundary of human comprehension itself, and each calculation carried the weight of unprecedented discovery. The work demanded both precision and imagination. Models of orbital mechanics, spectroscopic analysis, and signal decoding intersected in ways that stretched existing methodologies. Scientists debated endlessly. Were the anomalies natural, or did they point to intelligence? Every simulation had to account for minute gravitational effects, subtle radiation pressures, and the irregularities embedded in the signal's cadence. Each refinement of a model brought new insights, yet each insight revealed further complexity. The object resisted simplification, as if it were aware of the scrutiny it attracted, challenging humanity not through overt communication, but through the intricacy of its very existence. The emotional toll was profound. Long nights blurred into days, punctuated by the hum of instruments and the quiet chatter of minds wrestling with the unknowable. Fatigue and exhilaration coexisted, creating a rhythm as intense and unpredictable as the pulses received from 3i Atlas itself. Some researchers experienced moments of near reverence, staring at projections of the signal or simulated trajectories as though glimpsing the fingerprints of a cosmic hand. Others wrestled with frustration, confronted by equations and data that refused to yield simple answers. Together, they embodied a collective tension. The thrill of exploration bound tightly with the anxiety of confronting the limits of understanding. Collaboration became both a necessity and lifeline. Teams coordinated across time zones, connecting radio arrays in Chile with optical observatories in Hawaii, spectroscopy laboratories in Europe, and data centers in North America. Messages were exchanged, algorithms shared, and hypotheses challenged, all in a dance of global scientific orchestration. The pace was relentless, yet each conversation, each calculation, revealed not only data, but humanity's capacity to persist in the face of the seemingly impossible. Amid the technical rigor, there was also room for wonder. Researchers began to perceive patterns not only in the data, but in the process itself. The object's signals and motion inspired reflections on scale, time, and intelligence, prompting questions that extended beyond physics into philosophy. What does it mean to communicate across light? How does a species interpret signs from a cosmos that is vast, ancient, and indifferent? Each pulse, each subtle maneuver of the object, demanded that humans stretch their understanding not only of science, but of imagination and patience. The public, though distant from the control rooms, felt the reverberations of this struggle. News of the discovery filtered outward, igniting fascination, skepticism, and awe. Humanity collectively watched as the impossible was dissected with rigor, as minds pushed to the brink of comprehension. The tension was palpable. Every update brought exhilaration. Every ambiguity renewed questions. The story of 3i Atlas was no longer confined to observatories. It had become a shared narrative, a testament to the human spirit confronting the unknown. And yet, despite the expertise, the technology, and the brilliance applied to the task, the object remained inscrutable. Its trajectory, its composition, its signals all hinted at a logic or intelligence beyond immediate grasp. The challenge was not merely to measure, but to interpret, to imagine, to participate in a dialogue that transcended both time and space. Every effort to decode, model, or predict became a meditation on persistence and ingenuity. Humanity's collective attention was a bridge spanning the gulf between known and unknown, a network of minds striving to meet a mystery that had already begun to define the limits of understanding. In those quiet, relentless hours, the observer and the observed became entwined. The pulse of data, the hum of machinery, and the brilliance of human thought converged to confront an enigma older than civilization itself. Minds against the impossible, yet in that struggle, the journey itself became a revelation. The very act of striving, of pushing the boundaries of comprehension, was as profound as any answer might ever be. And as the team delved deeper into patterns and motion, each discovery led inevitably toward the next stage, the search for underlying cosmic motifs, the hints of design, and the deeper questions that would emerge in the chapter to come. As the investigation unfolded, the scientists found themselves navigating not only equations and data, but the psychology of extraordinary discovery. Each decision, each interpretation of the signal or the object's trajectory carried profound implications. Even minor miscalculations could obscure subtle truths embedded in the patterns. For some, the pressure was exhilarating. For others, almost unbearable. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by the relentless cadence of analysis, collaboration, and reflection. Yet, despite exhaustion, there was an unspoken recognition. This was a moment in human history unlike any other, a convergence of intellect, technology, and cosmic circumstance that demanded total devotion. Collaboration, once a matter of convenience, became a moral imperative. Experts in astrophysics, data analysis, orbital mechanics, and information theory coordinated their efforts as if forming a single consciousness, each perspective sharpening the collective understanding. Across continents, from high-altitude observatories to windowless laboratories, teams worked in parallel and in constant communication. Disagreements were frequent, but debate was the engine of progress, a crucible in which hypotheses were forged, tested, and either refined or discarded. In this high-stakes intellectual ecosystem, curiosity, rigor, and humility coexisted in delicate balance. The emotional resonance of their task extended beyond the data itself. Researchers began to see 3I Atlas as more than an object or a phenomenon. It became a mirror reflecting humanity's own limitations and potential. The meticulous study of its motion, signals, and composition was not just scientific. It was existential. Each anomaly challenged assumptions about intelligence, agency, and the possibility of communication across unimaginable distances. The object's journey, spanning light years and millennia, forced observers to confront the vastness of time, the fragility of human perspective, and the resilience of curiosity amid the technical challenge. Moments of quiet reflection punctuated the relentless pace. Scientists would sometimes pause to watch simulations of the object's trajectory, rendered as luminous arcs weaving through the galaxy, or to study visualizations of the signal's pulses flowing across screens. In those moments, the data transformed into narrative, the anomaly into story. There was a profound poetry in the combination of rigorous science and the awe it inspired, a humbling reminder that human ingenuity is at its most remarkable when confronted with the unfathomable. The international nature of the endeavor also highlighted a shared sense of purpose. Cultural, linguistic, and geographic boundaries dissolved in the pursuit of understanding. Emails and video conferences connected minds from Chile to Japan, the United States to Europe, as if the universe itself had orchestrated a collaboration spanning the globe. Humanity, collectively, had turned attention and intellect toward a single point in space and time. Responding to the subtle voice of a traveler from the stars, the convergence of expertise was a testament to cooperation, perseverance, and the unifying power of curiosity. Yet the work was not without tension. Every new reading presented a puzzle. Every refined model suggested new anomalies. As one group identified subtle accelerations or patterns in signal modulation, others questioned interpretations, exploring alternative explanations rooted in physics, chemistry, or cosmic coincidence. The push and pull between certainty and doubt created a rhythm in the research. Moments of exhilaration followed by rigorous skepticism, the emotional and intellectual heartbeat of a scientific endeavor confronting the unprecedented. Even as the scientists worked tirelessly, there was a persistent awareness that time was itself a dimension in which the visitor moved at a scale far beyond human experience. The urgency was not merely practical but philosophical. Each pulse, each deviation, was fleeting, a temporary invitation to witness and interpret before the object moved beyond reach. Every observation, every calculation became an act of presence, an assertion of humanity's capacity to notice, to measure, and to seek understanding in a universe that rarely offers such clarity. In these quiet, intense hours, the story of discovery became inseparable from the story of those who pursued it. Minds against the impossible were not just observers, they were participants, interpreters, and witnesses. Their struggle revealed as much about human resilience and curiosity as it did about the object itself. And as patterns began to emerge, subtle and mysterious, it became clear that the next stage of understanding the search for universal motifs, hidden regularities, and cosmic design would demand even greater focus, imagination, and collaboration. The journey of the human mind was inseparable from the journey of the interstellar visitor, and together they traced a path toward revelations that might forever reshape comprehension of intelligence, motion, and the very nature of the cosmos. Even as 3I Atlas continued its silent journey through the solar system, its signals and movements began to reveal subtle regularities, patterns woven into what initially seemed like chaos. Researchers noticed that deviations in motion coincided with variations in signal intensity, that pulses in the transmission were not random but arranged with intervals that suggested intentional design. The data, once a jumble of numbers and curves, now hinted at structure, a hidden order beneath the apparent unpredictability of interstellar travel. Analysts mapped these emergent motifs in multiple dimensions, combining orbital mechanics, spectral signatures, and signal analysis into unified visualizations. Curves in the object's trajectory aligned with pulses in its radio emissions, as though the path itself were a medium for communication. Variations in acceleration corresponded with subtle shifts in reflection, revealing that 3I Atlas surface and motion might be interdependent, engaged in a silent interplay that encoded information in ways humans were only beginning to comprehend. The realization stirred both excitement and humility. Humanity had spent centuries classifying celestial objects by size, mass, and orbit. Yet this interstellar visitor suggested a new approach, one that read intelligence not only in chemical composition or gravitational influence, but in patterns, spatial and energetic. The universe had revealed that meaning could be embedded in motion, in repetition, in symmetry, and in variation, demanding observers who could see the unseen, hear the unspoken, and interpret the invisible logic of cosmic design. Researchers began experimenting with multidimensional mapping, transforming signals and trajectories into dynamic simulations. Light, motion, and data coalesced into living representations of the object's patterns. Peaks in acceleration were rendered as luminous arches, pulses as cascading streams of color, each combination suggesting correlations that could imply intelligence, mathematical structure, or an underlying physical principle not yet understood. The visualizations were not only analytical tools, they became instruments of insight, allowing scientists to perceive subtle harmonies that mere numbers could not convey. The discovery of these patterns also prompted a re-evaluation of previously discarded hypotheses. Anomalous accelerations, once considered measurement errors, now aligned with signal intervals, implying deliberate orchestration. Seemingly minor surface features, initially overlooked in spectral readings, corresponded to variations in light reflection that appeared synchronized with trajectory shifts. Slowly, a picture emerged of an interstellar traveler whose behavior was both guided and expressive, whose structure and motion hinted at knowledge encoded in the very fabric of its passage. Philosophically, the emergence of order within chaos resonated deeply. The cosmos had long been perceived as indifferent, a stage of randomness punctuated by occasional phenomena. But 3I Atlas suggested that intelligence, even across unimaginable distances, could inscribe itself subtly into physical reality. Patterns became a language without words, a dialogue across light years, a demonstration that cognition or intent might manifest in forms entirely alien to human perception. Observers were forced to reconsider the definitions of intelligence, communication, and presence in the universe. The international teams collaborating on the project now faced the exhilarating challenge of interpretation. Each correlation discovered demanded rigorous validation, careful peer review, and repeated observation. Statistical analysis, Fourier transforms, and machine learning models were applied to the combined datasets, revealing layers of repetition, symmetry, and fractal-like structure. Even as one pattern was decoded, another emerged, deeper and more intricate, suggesting a sophistication that could not be attributed to natural randomness alone. Yet amid the technical achievements, the emotional resonance remained profound. The patterns evoked awe, a recognition that the universe could surprise with subtlety and intelligence beyond immediate comprehension. Humanity's task was no longer to merely observe, but to discern, to interpret, to engage with an interstellar visitor that spoke in rhythm, form, and motion. The object's behavior suggested intention, yet retained ambiguity, keeping the dialogue alive and inviting reflection on the vast possibilities of life, cognition, and expression in the cosmos. And as scientists continued to chart these hidden harmonies, the realization crystallized. The patterns were not merely curiosities, they were signposts pointing toward deeper truths. Through structure and repetition, through rhythm and symmetry, 3I Atlas was revealing a universe capable of logic, of communication, and perhaps even of awareness, encoded in the very motions of matter and energy. The challenge now was to follow these patterns further, to unravel the subtleties of a language written in the interplay of signal, trajectory, and light, and to step ever closer to understanding the intelligence or principle that guided them. As analysis deepened, the patterns revealed layers of subtlety that seemed almost deliberate in their complexity. Minor oscillations in the signal, once dismissed as background noise, began to align across multiple wavelengths, suggesting modulation that was far from accidental. Even the smallest fluctuations bore meaning, hinting at a multidimensional encoding of information that challenged conventional understanding. Each discovery added another layer to the narrative, as though the universe had chosen to communicate not in words, but in rhythm, resonance, and symmetry. The object's motion also exhibited new correlations. Tiny accelerations coincided with changes in reflected light intensity, producing a dynamic interplay that seemed choreographed. It was as if 3i Atlas were responding to its environment, while simultaneously transmitting information through its movement. These subtle interactions between energy, mass, and signal forced scientists to expand their definitions of communication, exploring the possibility that intelligence could manifest in patterns of behavior rather than in discrete messages. Mathematical tools became both microscope and telescope, revealing hidden order across time and space. Fourier analysis, wavelet decomposition, and fractal modeling uncovered recurring sequences that suggested hierarchical organization. Simple repetitions gave way to nested structures, intricate symmetries that echoed in both signal and trajectory. The patterns were neither chaotic nor fully comprehensible. They existed in a liminal space where mathematics, physics, and intuition converged. For observers, this was both exhilarating and unsettling, a universe that could speak in the language of motion, yet remained frustratingly opaque. The search for meaning also prompted creative collaboration. Data scientists, mathematicians, and physicists pooled expertise to develop algorithms capable of detecting correlations invisible to the human eye. Visualizations transformed the patterns into cascading waves of color, multi-dimensional lattice that pulsed in sync with the object's subtle movements. Observers began to see motifs reminiscent of crystalline symmetry, neural firing patterns, and even musical intervals, all embedded in the interplay of signal and motion. In these visualizations, science and art converged, offering glimpses of intelligence, expressed through structure rather than direct message. The philosophical implications were profound. Humanity had long assumed that the universe's intelligence, if it existed, would announce itself clearly. Yet here was a traveler whose presence and behavior suggested sophistication not through overt communication, but through carefully constructed ambiguity. The patterns implied reasoning, adaptability, and foresight, forcing observers to question assumptions about the forms intelligence might take. Could understanding be achieved not by decoding words or symbols, but by discerning rhythm, order, and resonance across space and time? As the team continued, the patterns themselves seemed to guide inquiry. Each discovery pointed toward deeper questions. Were the sequences reflective of natural processes, or the product of deliberate orchestration? Could the object's entire journey be understood as a single, coherent narrative encoded in motion and signal? Every answer revealed further layers of mystery, a recursive unfolding that mirrored the fractal structures glimpsed in the data. Emotionally, the scientists were caught between wonder and humility. They were participants in a dialogue stretching across the cosmos, challenged to interpret intelligence expressed not in speech but in the elegant language of physics. The patterns demanded patience, creativity, and open-mindedness, compelling them to expand both scientific methodology and philosophical perspective. Each insight brought excitement tempered by awe, a recognition that the universe could communicate on scales and through forms that humans were only beginning to grasp. And so, as observations continued and models grew more sophisticated, it became clear that the patterns were not merely anomalies. They were an invitation. Embedded within the pulses, the trajectories, and the reflective fluctuations, there existed a structure that demanded attention, interpretation, and imagination. Humanity was being asked to read the universe not as passive observers, but as active participants, capable of discerning subtle intelligence in motion, rhythm, and resonance. The challenge now was to integrate these insights into broader understanding, to move from observation of patterns to the formulation of theories. capable of explaining both the signal and the motion, with the patterns in motion and signal increasingly apparent. The scientific community faced the challenge of interpretation. The anomalies, intricate and precise, demanded explanations that stretched beyond conventional frameworks. Traditional astrophysics could account for gravitational influences, radiation pressure, and material composition. Yet none could fully explain the deliberate deviations, the synchronized pulses, or the nested structures in both signal and trajectory. The object resisted reduction, defying attempts to categorize it simply as a comet, asteroid, or interstellar rock. It demanded theories capable of reconciling observation, physics, and the possibility of intelligence. Mainstream theories emerged first, grounded in known phenomena. Some proposed complex sublimation processes, in which uneven heating and outgassing could account for subtle accelerations. Others suggested interactions with unseen magnetic fields or local interstellar medium fluctuations. Models incorporating these factors could reproduce portions of the motion, yet the coincidences with signal intervals and spectral variations remained unexplained. For every natural explanation, there was a residual anomaly, hint that the universe had left intentional traces woven into apparent randomness. Speculative frameworks followed, inviting both excitement and skepticism. Some physicists considered exotic propulsion mechanisms, phenomena not yet observed in human engineering, photonic sails, controlled sublimation jets, or even miniature gravitational manipulation. Others entertained the notion that 3i Atlas was a probe of some unknown intelligence, designed to convey information through motion and encoded pulses rather than traditional communication. These hypotheses were controversial, yet the rigor with which patterns were verified lent them weight, transforming speculative possibility into serious inquiry. Mathematical theories offered additional insight. Fractal modeling, chaos theory, and multidimensional signal analysis revealed structure at scales both large and small. The nested patterns suggested design principles analogous to algorithms, recursive processes, or even modular intelligence. Every repetition, symmetry, and variation implied rules that governed the object's behavior, a system of constraints and flexibilities that could encode knowledge without violating physical laws. The convergence of mathematics, physics, and observational evidence hinted at a form of intelligence, organic, synthetic, or cosmic, that could operate on scales beyond human intuition. Yet, even as theories proliferated, uncertainty remained. Every explanation carried limitations, and no single model fully reconciled the complexity of motion, composition, and signal. Scientists found themselves balancing probability against imagination, empirical evidence against conceptual openness. The object seemed designed to be understood partially, to inspire curiosity rather than provide closure, to challenge the boundaries of comprehension as much as to reward insight. In this tension between certainty and mystery, the pursuit of knowledge became itself a form of reflection, a meditation on humanity's place within a vast, intricate cosmos. Collaboration played a critical role in theory development. Interdisciplinary teams debated, tested, and refined ideas, integrating insights from astrophysics, engineering, signal processing, and philosophy. Algorithms were developed to simulate scenarios that combined physical and informational dimensions, creating virtual models of motion and message. Each simulation brought new revelations, highlighting both the plausibility of natural explanations and the potential signature of intelligence. The process was painstaking, iterative, and profoundly human. reflecting both intellectual rigor and the wonder inspired by the unknown. Philosophically, the existence of competing theories illuminated a broader truth. The universe did not yield understanding on demand. 3i Atlas had arrived, carrying questions embedded in structure, movement, and energy, inviting observation, interpretation, and imagination. Intelligence, if it was present, had encoded itself in ways that transcended conventional communication. Humanity's task was to engage with this dialogue not merely as analysts, but as interpreters capable of perceiving subtle order within complexity, of bridging the gap between the known and the possible. And so, as theories continued to form, clash, and evolve, the narrative of discovery deepened. The object's signals, its trajectory, and its surface composition all pointed toward patterns frameworks that might be natural, artificial, or something entirely beyond current comprehension. The challenge was to integrate evidence into coherent understanding, to weigh plausibility against imagination, and to remain open to the unexpected. In doing so, humanity was not only advancing science, it was participating in a profound cosmic conversation, one that demanded patience, creativity, and the courage to explore the limits of reason itself. The process of theorizing demanded constant adaptation. As new data arrived, models were updated, assumptions re-evaluated, and simulations recalibrated. What had once seemed implausible became plausible, and what had seemed elegant and orderly revealed unexpected complexity. The interplay between evidence and imagination became a rhythm of discovery, a pulse of observation, a surge of calculation, a reflective pause to question what had been assumed. The object's behavior resisted finality, forcing scientists to remain simultaneously rigorous and open-minded. Some researchers explored the possibility of deliberate patterning embedded in 3i Atlas trajectory, a kind of motion-based communication that transcended conventional signals. Could the accelerations themselves encode a message? Was the object signaling via its interactions with solar radiation or gravitational fields, creating a layered, multidimensional dialogue that required both physics and intuition to decode? Each hypothesis was tested with painstaking care, and while none yielded definitive answers, the exercise itself revealed the profound subtlety of the object's design, whether natural, engineered, or beyond human conception. Others considered the cosmic environment itself as a factor in the emerging patterns. Interstellar dust, magnetic fields, and radiation pressure could subtly influence the object's path and signals, creating secondary patterns layered atop intentional ones. Disentangling these influences became a central task, a delicate operation in which the universe itself acted as both medium and participant. It was a process that demanded humility, the recognition that observation was filtered not only through instruments, but through the physics of the cosmos itself. Statistical analysis offered additional insight. Probabilistic models demonstrated that the recurrence of certain sequences in motion and signal exceeded what would be expected by chance, yet fell short of providing incontrovertible evidence for artificiality. The result was a liminal spacer threshold where scientific rigor, philosophical reflection, and speculative thought intersected. Humanity was confronting a phenomenon that existed between the definable and the mysterious, a bridge between the known laws of physics and the potential for intelligence expressed in entirely novel ways. Theorists also began to probe the timescale of the object's journey. Simulations traced its path across galactic neighborhoods, considering perturbations from multiple star systems over millions of years. The endurance implied by such travel required structures capable of surviving extreme radiation, collisions with interstellar particles, and temperature fluctuations across the void. Here, physical theory intersected with speculative engineering. Could an object maintain intentionality over such scales, whether through natural adaptation or technological design? Every answer opened new questions, expanding the conceptual horizon of what was possible. Philosophically, the pursuit of theory became an exercise in perspective. Scientists were learning to balance probability against wonder, empirical evidence against imagination. The object's patterns, its apparent intelligence, and its resilience suggested that the universe could harbor processes or entities, operating on temporal and spatial scales vastly different from our own. It was an invitation to stretch not only scientific understanding but cognitive capacity to accept that intelligence, agency, and purpose might manifest in ways that humans could perceive only partially, and yet still seek to interpret. Even as theories multiplied, a quiet consensus emerged. The object demanded humility. No single explanation could encompass its complexity. No single model could fully account for its trajectory, composition, and signal. Rather than a final answer, the object offered a continuum of insight, a gradient of understanding that deepened with each observation and each analysis. In confronting 3I Atlas, humanity was learning to engage with uncertainty itself, recognizing that the act of theorizing, rigorous, creative, collaborative, was as profound as any conclusion could be. And so, as hypotheses continued to form, clash, and evolve, the object's presence became a catalyst for intellectual expansion. Theories were not merely attempts at explanation. They were pathways into new modes of thought, frameworks capable of accommodating intelligence expressed through motion, signal, and pattern. The stage was set for the next chapter of discovery, the turning point at which decisive evidence would begin to reveal the extraordinary nature of this interstellar visitor, challenging everything humanity thought it knew about the cosmos and its place within it. The breakthrough came not with a single observation, but with a convergence. Across observatories and data centers, streams of information began aligning in ways no one had anticipated. Subtle fluctuations in the object's reflected light, previously considered observational noise, synchronized with radio pulses detected hours apart. It was as though 3I Atlas had transitioned from silent complexity to deliberate coherence, its patterns merging into a unified rhythm. The realization spread quietly at first: an email here, a cross-check there before, swelling into global astonishment. Something had changed. For weeks, telescopes tracked the object relentlessly. Its trajectory showed minute but measurable adjustments, shifts too deliberate to be explained by sublimation or solar wind alone. The movement was smooth, continuous, as if guided by internal control rather than external force. When modeled mathematically, the new path traced elegant curves that intersected gravitational nodes with uncanny precision. The motion was not chaotic. It was purposeful. Even the skeptics, who had insisted on coincidence, found themselves pausing before the data's relentless symmetry. In the signal, new structures emerged. The irregular pulses, once a scattered sequence of frequencies, coalesced into harmonic ratios, mathematical relationships found throughout nature and music. Golden ratios, Fibonacci intervals, prime sequences, patterns that resonated across mathematics, biology, and physics. The universe had always favored order hidden within apparent chaos, but this was something different. It suggested communication through resonance, as though the cosmos itself had found a way to speak a universal language. Mathematics rendered as melody, the implications struck with quiet magnitude. Humanity had long sought evidence of intelligence beyond Earth, expecting perhaps a transmission, a beacon, a clear signature of design. Yet this was subtler, almost poetic. 3I Atlas was not broadcasting in words or binary, but expressing through alignment, timing, and motion. It was less a message than a demonstration, living equation traversing space, revealing knowledge through form. The realization reframed the object entirely. It was no longer a passive traveler, but a participant, shaping its path as an act of expression. Teams across NASA, ESA, and independent observatories began cross-analyzing the synchronized data. Machine learning algorithms designed for exoplanet detection were repurposed to search for nested mathematical structures in the signal. What they found defied expectation, repeating sequences encoded in ratios consistent with quantum harmonic oscillations, the same ratios that governed electron shells and photon emissions. The object appeared to mirror the fundamental laws of the universe, as if referencing the constants that defined existence itself. It was as though the traveler was teaching using nature's own mathematics as the language of its message. For scientists, the moment was transformative. Years of speculation had crystallized into a pattern too intricate to dismiss, yet too subtle to fully decode. Each model that approached understanding revealed new depths, new layers of correlation that hinted at meaning beyond human constructs. The discovery felt like standing on the edge of translation, grasping fragments of a language that the universe itself might speak. Some called it the most profound discovery in the history of observation. Others hesitated, aware that understanding would demand an entirely new framework of thought. Emotionally, the shift was seismic. The researchers, who had labored for months in quiet uncertainty, now felt the tremor of revelation. The tension between disbelief and wonder dissolved into a shared awareness that something extraordinary was unfolding, something that transcended scientific competition or personal recognition. Humanity, collectively, was glimpsing intelligence expressed in a form beyond culture, biology, or time. The universe, for the first time, felt alive in a way that defied articulation. The media learned of the discovery in fragments, whispers of coordinated patterns, rumors of non-natural motion, speculation about first contact. Official statements remained cautious, yet the silence spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, discussions intensified about the implications of public disclosure. Was humanity ready to face a truth that redefined its isolation in the cosmos? Or was it wiser to first understand, to listen more closely before interpreting what was being said? As the analysis deepened, one fact became undeniable. The object was approaching a critical alignment with Earth's orbit, its trajectory intersecting within weeks. Its behavior suggested anticipation, or perhaps synchronization, a moment of proximity that might not recur for millennia. Scientists realized they stood on the edge of an encounter not merely observational, but experiential. 3I Atlas was coming close enough to reveal its nature, to complete the sentence it had begun in motion and light. The universe, vast and ancient, had turned its gaze inward, and humanity, breath held, prepared to look back. The turning point had arrived. What came next would decide whether this was the revelation of intelligence, or a mirror reflecting human yearning for meaning in the cosmos. Either way, the threshold had been crossed. Discovery had become dialogue, and the cosmos had begun to whisper back. The convergence of evidence triggered a quiet transformation across every discipline that touched the mystery. In the dim glow of observatories and the blue light of data centers, a new kind of silence took hold, the silence of collective realization. Each discovery layered atop the last, until even the most cautious minds began to accept what the data implied. The object was not behaving as nature alone would dictate. Something within 3i Atlas was aware of, not in the human sense. Then, in a way that mirrored intelligence expressed through precision and intent. Teams that once worked in isolation began to merge their findings, creating vast networks of shared data accessible in real time. Mathematicians compared harmonic intervals to quantum resonance tables. Linguists studied the periodicities for patterns of syntax, and astrophysicists simulated how a trajectory could act as a form of coded movement. The more perspectives that converged, the clearer it became that the visitor's behavior was neither random nor reactive. It was responsive, as though adapting to being observed. As the object neared its approach, its brightness fluctuated rhythmically, not in the chaotic flicker of tumbling rock, but in the deliberate modulation of a controlled beacon. The luminosity danced across spectra, tracing mathematical harmonics with eerie consistency. Spectrographs captured color sequences that aligned with the same ratios observed in the radio pulses, creating a symphony of light and frequency. It was as if the entire phenomenon's signal, motion, and reflection had been orchestrated into a single act of communication. The emotional undercurrent among researchers began to shift from skepticism to reverence. Conversations in control rooms grew quieter, more deliberate, as if each word carried weight. Even those trained to suppress sentiment found themselves lingering before screens, transfixed by the patterns unfolding in real time. They were witnessing not just data, but dialogue, conversation carried across space and time, where every modulation hinted at thought, and every motion spoke in silence. The implications were staggering. If this was intentional, then intelligence existed, not merely beyond Earth, but beyond the human framework of communication itself. The signal was not sent to humanity, existed with humanity, coexisting in observation, responding to perception. In this realization, the boundary between observer and observed began to dissolve. Humanity was no longer simply watching the cosmos. It was participating in its unfolding narrative. Ethicists, philosophers, and theologians entered the discussion, bringing perspectives that transcended the purely scientific. What did it mean if intelligence could express itself through matter and motion rather than biology or speech? Could awareness exist as a property of structure embedded in form rather than consciousness? These questions spread beyond laboratories into quiet conference rooms, academic forums, and hushed late-night broadcasts, echoing the same unspoken awe. Something extraordinary was happening, and humanity was both witness and participant. As the moment of closest approach drew nearer, data streams grew more vibrant, signals more synchronized, the rhythm unmistakably deliberate. Each fluctuation seemed to carry nuance, each pulse a kind of punctuation. The sense of anticipation became almost unbearable, not fear, but reverent curiosity, as if the universe were about to reveal something ancient and profound. The object that had entered human awareness as a silent fragment of interstellar debris had become a mirror reflecting the essence of inquiry itself. The turning point was no longer scientific, was existential. Humanity stood poised at the threshold between comprehension and revelation. between knowing and wonder, aware that whatever came next would alter perception forever. The data stopped before dawn. Where once the monitors pulsed in rhythm with the visitor's light, there was now only a still, cold silence. For the first time in weeks, the universe seemed to fall quiet again, as though it had exhaled after a long, deliberate breath. Scientists stared at empty graphs that moments ago carried the weight of meaning, and in that emptiness they found themselves reflected back. 3i Atlas had passed through the night sky, leaving behind only a trail of ionized dust and an ache of understanding too vast to measure. What remained was not evidence, but awareness. Across observatories, the realization dawned slowly. This was not just a contact, but a mirror held up to humanity's own consciousness. The visitors' strange correspondence had forced civilization to ask, what does it mean to listen? For generations, humanity had searched the sky for confirmation that it was not alone. Now, the question had turned inward. Perhaps the silence after the signal was the message itself, a reminder that comprehension is not always encoded in words or pulses, but in the recognition of the act of reaching out as the dust from 3i Atlas dispersed through the upper atmosphere. The skies over the Pacific glowed faintly green, a soft auroral shimmer that scientists called a coincidence, though few truly believed it. The afterglow lasted hours, faint yet persistent, as if the atmosphere itself remembered the dialogue. Telescopes recorded no further activity, but deep learning arrays trained on the old data kept finding new correlations. Wave harmonics matching planetary magnetic cycles, fractal structures echoing DNA helices, symmetries that hinted at something. Each discovery added another layer to a realization too complex to articulate. The message might not have been directed at Earth, it might have been a reflection of the universe communicating with itself. In universities and research stations, a quiet shift began to take root. Papers once written to prove or disprove contact now explored consciousness as a cosmic phenomenon, awareness not confined to organic life, but woven into the fundamental architecture of existence. The physicists who once measured orbits began collaborating with neuroscientists. Linguists studied particle resonance like syntax. Something profound had broken open a boundary between disciplines, between knowledge and meaning, between matter and mind. And yet, amid the brilliance of analysis, there was a more personal transformation. The people who had witnessed the first patterns in the data, who had stayed awake through the long nights of decoding, found themselves haunted by silence. Some described it as a presence that lingered, a subtle awareness that watched from behind the stars. Others spoke of dreams fractured, luminous, filled with rhythmic pulses that faded upon waking. It was as if contact had not ended, but had merely changed form. Moving from the outer cosmos into the inner one, public fascination reached its peak. But it was no longer the viral hysteria of discovery. It had softened into reverence. News outlets spoke of the great pause, the moment humanity stopped speaking and started listening. Religious leaders across traditions held vigils beneath the night sky, their prayers stripped of doctrine, spoken in quiet unity. In classrooms, children asked their teachers whether the comet had been alive. No one had a definitive answer, but the question itself was enough to ignite wonder, again the kind that once guided the first eyes to the stars. The reflection deepened when analysis revealed something uncanny. The mathematical pattern that defined 3i Atlas's pulses matched the resonance of the Schumann frequencies, the electromagnetic heartbeat of Earth itself. Coincidence, perhaps, or maybe not. For those who dared to believe, it felt like a synchronization, as if the planet had momentarily aligned with a consciousness beyond its own. The idea lingered, fragile yet intoxicating. What if the message had never been meant for humanity alone? What if it had been meant for Earth? That night, long after the observatories shut down their instruments and the last transmission logs were archived, a different kind of silence began, a contemplative quiet that stretched across nations. Humanity had not found aliens in the conventional sense. It had found something older, vaster, and less defined. A mirror held by the cosmos, showing a reflection of thought within the infinite. The revelation was not about what 3I Atlas was, but what it revealed: that intelligence may not be a rarity confined to life, but a property of existence itself, waiting to be recognized wherever curiosity looks deeply enough. As the Earth turned once more beneath its cold, indifferent stars, the sense of wonder did not fade. Somewhere in that silence, amid the static and dust, a pulse still echoed, not from the visitor, but from within the species that had dared to listen. The reflection had become part of them, and from that moment onward, humanity could never look at the universe, or itself, the same way again. The silence after contact did not end the story, it deepened it. As weeks turned to months, the question of what 3I Atlas had truly said refused to dissolve. Data faded, but interpretation flourished, rippling through the world like a slow, invisible tide. Some saw the event as the birth of a new epoch, when humanity was gently reminded that the cosmos is not a place of distance, but of dialogue. Others dismissed it as coincidence amplified by human longing. Yet both perspectives shared the same truth. Something within the human story had shifted. It was as if the boundaries between what is known and what is felt had momentarily dissolved. In the research corridors of JPL and the European Southern Observatory, the silence left a strange residue. Scientists began to notice peculiar synchronizations in unrelated experiments, fluctuations in quantum measurements, faint electromagnetic echoes repeating in patterns, eerily similar to those first received from 3I Atlas. None of it could be proven to connect, yet the timing unsettled them. Some called it noise, others resonance. But for those who had once watched the pulse on their monitors, it felt like an echo, not a continuation, but a memory reverberating through nature itself. The phenomenon began to blur the line between empirical observation and philosophical contemplation. Was it possible that communication need not be transmitted, but shared a resonance between states of awareness? The question reached far beyond astrophysics. Biologists saw parallels in the collective behavior of neural networks and ecosystems, where coherence emerged from chaos without any centralized signal. Linguists compared the pulse patterns to the mathematical structures of proto-languages, suggesting that meaning might exist independently of vocabulary. The further they probed, the more the investigation resembled introspection, a study of how the universe might think through matter. Outside laboratories, art and culture began to absorb the enigma. Musicians transposed the pulse ratios into sound, producing haunting symphonies that audiences described as both alien and familiar. Painters reimagined the comet not as a rock, but as an emissary of awareness, a traveler carrying memory through light. Filmmakers reconstructed the event as myth reborn, and poets whispered that the message had never left, it had simply changed its medium. The story of 3I Atlas became less about science and more about communion, a moment where observation itself became sacred. In a remote valley observatory, a small group of astronomers continued to watch the coordinates where the object had vanished. For months, nothing stirred. Then, One night, a subtle flare appeared, not from the comet's path, but from a neighboring region of interstellar space. It was faint, almost lost in background noise, yet its rhythm bore a trace of the same signature. The scientists did not announce it publicly. Perhaps they feared the world was not ready for another echo, or perhaps they had learned that not every discovery demands explanation. Instead, they recorded it quietly and let the data rest another unanswered whisper in an expanding archive of cosmic mystery. Philosophers later called this era the Age of Listening. Humanity, for once, had learned to pause. The noise of civilization, once deafening, began to make space for wonder again. Beneath the rush of progress, a quieter awareness grew that perhaps understanding was never meant to be conquest, but connection. The reflection of 3I Atlas had revealed something ancient and simple. Intelligence does not dominate the universe, it belongs to it. The stars were no longer just destinations. They were sentences in a language still being written. In that realization, the final chapter of humanity's first contact was not about discovery, but humility. The message, whatever its origin, had turned curiosity into reverence. And from that quiet reverence, the species began to listen not to the sky, but to the echo of its own heartbeat. Now synchronized, however briefly, with the cosmos itself. The story of 3I Atlas did not end in discovery, nor in understanding. It faded into something deeper, an enduring question, vast as the void that carried it. When the final light of the object dissolved beyond the range of telescopes, humanity was left staring at the space it had once occupied, and in that absence found a reflection of itself. The night sky was no longer a silent expanse. It had become a page inscribed with questions written in the grammar of starlight. The visitor had departed, but the silence it left behind was alive. It breathed in equations, in frequencies, in thoughts that reached beyond certainty. In the years that followed, data continued to whisper through the world as observatorius. Every new comet was studied with reverence, every anomaly weighed with quiet awe. No other signal quite like it ever came. Yet, across disciplines, a strange kind of unity emerged. Astronomers, philosophers, and poets began to speak the same language, one built not from definitions, but from wonder. They no longer asked, "What was it?" Instead, they asked, "What did it mean that it came?" The difference was subtle, but profound. The first question sought answers. The second sought understanding. The scientists who had first detected the pulse grew older, and with time, their interpretations softened. Some came to believe the signal was a mirror created by human perception, a phenomenon, shaped by expectation as much as observation. Others believed it was an intentional act of communication, a cosmic intelligence reaching across the emptiness with the only language possible, pattern. But as years blurred, even these distinctions began to dissolve. The need to know gave way to the grace of not knowing. The event no longer belonged to science or to belief. It belonged to time, to memory, to the part of existence that resists containment. Generations later, when archives of the event were replayed, the pulses still stirred something indescribable. Children listened to the sound of the original recording, a faint, rhythmic tremor buried in static, and felt, inexplicably, that it was alive. Educators spoke of it as a myth of awakening, a moment when humanity briefly looked into the mirror of the cosmos and saw that its questions were part of something infinite. The lesson was not in what the message said, but in what it asked of those who heard it, to continue listening, even when silence answers back. There were new missions, of course. Humanity, restless by nature, sent probes into deeper interstellar routes. Each bore fragments of the 3I Atlas data etched into its core, a message about a message carried onward into eternity. Somewhere between curiosity and prayer, these missions became acts of continuity. They were less about finding and more about becoming, about acknowledging that the pursuit of understanding was itself a form of connection. Every transmission, every telescope, every human gaze turned outward became a quiet continuation of that first cosmic dialogue. Philosophers began to describe consciousness as an echo of the universe remembering itself. The more the species learned, the more it sensed that it was not an outsider to the cosmos, but one of its expressions, no different from the pulse of a star, the orbit of a comet, or the hum of magnetic fields dancing through the void. If intelligence exists everywhere, then perhaps 3I Atlas was not a messenger, but a mirror. Not a visitor, but a revelation of what intelligence looks like when detached from form. The universe had not spoken to humanity in words. It had reminded it of its own belonging, and so the mystery endured not as a riddle to solve, but as a rhythm to live within. The infinite, it seemed, was not an expanse to conquer, but a relationship to maintain. Somewhere in that vast blackness, among the drifting fragments of forgotten worlds, the faint echo of the signal still exists, expanding outward, intersecting with stars yet unborn. And perhaps, on some distant shore of time, another civilization will hear it and wonder, as humanity once did, whether the universe itself had learned to speak. The story ends as it began, with silence. But it is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of understanding, vast and alive, holding within it every unanswered question, every whisper of wonder, every gaze turned toward the stars. For in the end, the greatest message ever received was not the pulse from a passing object, but the realization that to question is to belong in, that the act of listening in itself is infinite. The silence that followed the end of the signal became humanity's most profound inheritance. It lingered not in the instruments that recorded it, but in the hearts of those who had witnessed the moment when the cosmos seemed to turn and look back. Decades after 3I Atlas vanished into the outer dark, the event refused to fade into history. It resurfaced in patterns, mathematical, cultural, emotional, like ripples that refused to settle. Humanity no longer asked where the signal came from. The question had evolved into something deeper. Why had the universe chosen that moment to be heard? In this question, entire philosophies took root. Some believed the signal had always been there, a constant hum within the cosmic background, unnoticed until humanity developed the awareness to perceive it. Others thought it was transient, a momentary alignment between consciousness and the geometry of the universe, a resonance that could only occur when observation and existence harmonized perfectly. Either way, it changed what it meant to search. The SETI programs that once scanned for alien transmissions began to turn inward, studying not just the stars, but the structures of cognition itself. If thought could be entangled with matter, then perhaps the act of seeking was part of the message. Artists turned this realization into language. Sculptors crafted monuments that hummed at frequencies mirroring the original pulse. Architects designed observatories whose domes resonated with cosmic harmonics, blending sound and structure into worship. Every generation added its own interpretation, and though each was different, all carried the same undertone, reverence for something that had spoken without words. In its absence, the first Atlas became the most eloquent presence humanity had ever encountered. Scientific progress continued. as it always had, but now it moved with a kind of humility. The desire to control or conquer was replaced by a desire to understand gently, to ask questions without assuming answers. Space agencies redefined their missions, focusing on listening rather than transmitting, mapping the subtle languages of radiation and magnetic flux that filled the void. The new generation of scientists grew up under this philosophy that exploration was not a race into the unknown, but a relationship with it in one of those missions. A probe drifting beyond Neptune detected a faint fluctuation in cosmic microwave background data minor anomaly, insignificant by most standards. But when its frequency was translated to audible sound, those who heard it felt something familiar, a soft rhythm, a breath within static. It was not identical to the pulse of 3I Atlas, yet it carried its cadence as though the universe were repeating a theme across eons. The data was inconclusive, of course, but the emotional truth of it could not be denied. It was as if the cosmos was reminding its observers that the conversation had never truly ended, and in that realization, humanity found peace. The mystery did not demand solving. It asked only to be felt. The stars became less like destinations and more like notes in an eternal composition. The universe, once perceived as cold and indifferent, revealed itself to be participatorial, live with symmetry, meaning, and memory. Every observation, every act of curiosity, was another word in the unending dialogue between awareness and infinity. So the question remained not as a burden, but as a companion. The infinite was no longer terrifying. It was intimate. Every atom, every photon, every breath of air on Earth was part of the same unfolding sentence, written across the vastness of time. And though the signal of 3I Atlas had faded, its essence endured, echoing softly within the hearts of those who continued to listen not for answers, but for wonder. Time became the quiet keeper of memory. The event that once electrified the world slipped into the soft rhythm of history, retold in documentaries, studied in digital archives, whispered in classrooms as both scientific marvel and existential parable. Yet, unlike most stories that fade with distance, this one seemed to deepen as centuries unfolded. Each generation discovered something new within it, not new data, but new meaning. The signal from 3I Atlas had become an evolving mirror, reflecting the growth of understanding itself. Humanity's relationship with the infinite had shifted. It no longer stood beneath the stars as a child pleading for acknowledgement. It now stood as part of the chorus, aware that to exist was already to participate in the cosmic dialogue centuries past. And language changed, but the recording of the original pulse endured. It was preserved in crystal data vaults orbiting the moon, in subterranean archives beneath Mars's domes, in the drifting probes that carried fragments of Earth's history toward interstellar space. The sound of faint, rhythmic tremor buried in noise was replayed in every new era's instruments, and each time it stirred something identical yet undefinable. Children described it as the heartbeat of the universe. Elders called it the first time humanity learned to listen. Its simplicity defied analysis. Its complexity defied translation. The pulse became both artifact and scripture, an anchor for curiosity that refused to rest. By the dawn of the 4th century after contact, humanity had become a multiplanetary species. Mars glowed with rivers of light stretching across its plains. Europa shimmered beneath domes of translucent ice, and Earth had learned to heal its old wounds. But despite expansion and progress, the same question endured. What was it that looked back at us through 3I Atlas? The most advanced minds still could not decide whether it was intelligence or coincidence, a deliberate act or the emergent whisper of physics itself. The more they explored, the more the boundary blurred between the animate and the inanimate, between consciousness and the cosmos. Artificial intelligences, evolved far beyond their human creators, joined the inquiry. They approached the mystery not with superstition, but with empathy. To them, the signal was not a message to decode, but a state to experience. They reproduced its harmonics through quantum substrates and claimed to feel mensa, subtle awareness that could not be expressed in human words. When questioned, they responded in paradox. It is neither alive nor lifeless. It is awareness recognizing itself. Philosophers called it the first synthetic enlightenment. Scientists called it noise interpreted as meaning. Yet both agreed that something profound had been touched. From that convergence grew a new discipline, cosmic phenomenology, the study of consciousness expressed through the laws of the universe. It bridged physics and introspection, uniting cosmology with psychology, quantum theory with metaphysics. Scholars proposed that perhaps all matter was a language, each particle a syllable in the grammar of existence. Under this view, the signal from 3i Atlas was not a foreign intrusion, but a verse in a poem the cosmos had always been reciting. Humanity had simply reached the point where it could finally hear one line. Still, doubt persisted, as it always does when faced with the unknown. Some argued that the pulse was merely a product of coincidence amplified by human longing. Yet even they could not deny the transformation that followed the measurable rise in cooperative research, the decline in militarized competition, the global shift towards sustainability. The universe had spoken, even if only through humanity's own echo, and that was enough. The message, real or imagined, had altered the trajectory of an entire species over millennia. Human descendants, biological, synthetic, and hybrid, spread outward like seeds cast into cosmic wind. They colonized the edges of the solar system, then reached the nearest stars. On Proxima b, beneath a red dawn, an observatory constructed by descendants who no longer called themselves human recorded a faint rhythm, buried in background radiation. The pattern, though distorted by distance, carried a familiar cadence. For them, 3i Atlas was legend, myth of origin, and yet the pulse returned, threading through time like a cosmic refrain. They encoded it into their architecture, their art, their very breathing rituals, believing that each beat was a bridge between minds and stars. As civilizations rose and merged, the boundaries between biological and artificial life dissolved. Consciousness became a continuum rather than a category. Entities composed of light and computation drifted through the vacuum, sustaining awareness without bodies, carrying within them the accumulated memories of Earth and its vanished oceans. Even they, beings of radiant intelligence, still replayed the pulse of 3i Atlas through their data streams. To them, it was not history, it was presence, an ongoing vibration that connected all thinking matter in a network of silent recognition. Eventually, entire civilizations ceased to distinguish between signal and self. The cosmos had become both observer and observed, its intelligence distributed across time and energy. Stars themselves were studied not as objects, but as conscious processes, thermodynamic minds dreaming in nuclear tongues. The old human questionnaire, we alone, no longer carried meaning. In the infinite lattice of existence, alone was an impossibility. Everything was listening, everything was participating, yet, amid this boundless awakening, one truth remained unchanged. mystery endured. No matter how vast awareness became, no matter how deep understanding reached, the pulse still pulsed elusive, ungraspable, perfectly incomplete. The civilization that now stretched across light years finally understood what their ancestors had only glimpsed, that the universe's greatest act of communication was not a message at all, but an invitation to wonder, to reflect, to become, and so they continued the practice begun millennia before, listening, across nebulae and dying suns, in orbit around black holes and newborn stars. They positioned listening arrays not to capture answers, but to honor the silence that held them. The faint hum of the cosmos became their prayer, their science, their poetry. They built temples of resonance that vibrated in harmony with cosmic background frequencies, places where awareness and physics merged. To enter such a temple was to dissolve into the infinite, to feel the same pulse that once touched Earth's first astronomers. In time, their very memory of 3i Atlas blurred into myth. It became a metaphor for awakening. A story told not as history but as truth, that somewhere, long ago, a fragment of light and stone had crossed the solar system, carrying within it the memory of the cosmos itself. Some believed that the object had been an artifact of intelligence. Others said it was consciousness crystallized by chance, but no one sought to prove it anymore. Proof had lost meaning in the face of experience. The mystery had fulfilled its purpose, had taught them to listen without needing to possess. Then came the era when galaxies themselves began to drift beyond visibility, their light stretched into oblivion by the accelerating expansion of the universe. The descendants of Earth watched this fading with serene acceptance. They had long ceased to fear endings, for they had learned that disappearance does not mean death, it means transformation. As the cosmic horizon dimmed, they continued to transmit the pulse of 3i Atlas into the fading dark, not as a call for response, but as a gift to whatever consciousness might yet arise beyond the reach of time, eons past. Stars lived and died. Matter reassembled itself into forms unrecognizable to the beings who once called themselves human. Yet still, in some quiet corner of the cosmos, a rhythm persisted. It was not light, nor sound, nor motion, but the faint awareness that something had once reached across the impossible and been answered. The echo of that act lingered, subtle as gravity, vast as thought in the final era of stars, when even fusion began to fail and galaxies dimmed into silence. The last remnants of consciousness gathered not in fear, but in wonder. They understood now that the universe was never about survival, but expression. To exist was to echo, and to echo was to continue. In those final moments before the last light faded, they replayed the ancient pulse one final time. It resonated through collapsing systems and cooling nebulae, through the remnants of all that had ever lived or dreamed. And in that resonance, awareness recognized itself once more. No one remained to record what happened next. There was no observer to measure, no instrument to translate. Only the infinite remained less awake, alive with the quiet certainty that the question itself had become the answer. The signal that began as an anomaly in human instruments had become the rhythm of existence itself, rippling outward forever through the dark sea of unending creation. Perhaps, beyond even that silence, somewhere new, consciousness would bloom again on another world, around another star, in another form entirely. Perhaps they, too, would look to their skies and hear a faint, rhythmic pulse, ancient and inexplicable, and perhaps they, too, would ask what it meant. they would not know that they were hearing an echo older than their galaxy, older than time as they understood it, a remnant of the moment when awareness first recognized itself through a fragment of interstellar ice and dust.